According to police data, bias crimes, often referred to as hate crimes, are on the rise in Portland. Fox 12 Investigates is taking a closer look behind the numbers to get a better idea of why Portland is seeing this trend. And investigative reporter Adrian Thomas is now live with us in the studio with this story. Adrian.
Well, Joe, Shauna, at first glance, bias crime and bias incident data in Portland is quite concerning. Advocates and community leaders tell us they do feel Portland is reflective of nationwide trends, showing a spike in hate crimes in recent years. But the same advocates and community leaders also feel part of this increase is due to more awareness and resources in confronting these crimes and incidents than ever before. In Oregon, bias crimes are defined as incidents where vandalism, assault, or other violence occurs driven by discriminatory views towards another person's race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, or national origin. Less severe bias incidents are defined by state law as hostile expressions towards another person driven by discriminatory views. According to the Portland Police Bureau, data shows from 2022 to 2023, there was an 81% increase in reported bias incidents and a shocking 132% increase in reported bias crimes. Sergeant Matthew Jacobson with the Portland Police Bureau feels this sharp increase is due to improved efforts from PPB.
We're doing a better job of educating people so they know that if they're the victim of a bias crime or a bias incident, what that is, that it is against the law, and that they can report it. And that honestly something will be done about it. So I think what you're seeing is an increased confidence on the part of our community in how we're operating and that we're taking these seriously.
PPB reports that in 2016, Portland started with 12 reported bias crimes. This number has grown almost every year since, steadily growing to 19 crimes in 2017, 28 in 2018, and fast forward to 55 crimes in 2021 and 2022 to a staggering 128 reported crimes in 2023, more than double the year prior. Portland has followed national trends as well. According to data compiled nationwide by the FBI, hate crime reports have steadily increased since 2018. Portland is no stranger to high-profile hate crime incidents. In spring 2022, Michael Bivens was arrested and charged with vandalizing multiple synagogues in Portland and attempting to start a fire in an occupied mosque at the Muslim Community Center of Portland. One of those vandalized synagogues was Congregation Beth Israel in Northwest Portland. We sat down with Rabbi Michael Kahana to hear his thoughts on the sharp increase in reported bias crimes and incidents in Portland since Beth Israel was vandalized over a year and a half ago.
Do you think it's more people are, because there's more kind of structures in place, more people are reporting these incidents, or, have you noticed kind of more of a hostile environment?
Nationally, the FBI is reporting that there's been a great increase in anti-Semitic crimes. There's no reason to think it's just a matter of increased reporting. And I would say, just from personal experience, reported experience, there is, over the past several years, a real increase in anti-Semitic incidents in Portland.
Rabbi Kahana says concern of bias behavior has been on the minds of his congregation in recent years following national trends and incidents in Portland. He feels improved efforts from local law enforcement are making a difference.
But what we have learned is that people who commit these kinds of crimes don't do it as a one-off. They've probably multiple people have affected who have no idea that they've been affected. And so for the law enforcement, it's really important to have that reporting because they can put those pieces together.
Randall Blazak chairs the Oregon Coalition Against Hate Crimes and was instrumental in getting statewide legislation passed in 2019, which redefined bias crimes and bias incidents in Oregon and established a statewide bias crime hotline where crimes or incidents can be reported. Blazak says trends in Portland and across the country hold true, that bias crimes and incidents are on the rise, but progress is being made.
So sometimes that increase is really a reflection of better work being done, collecting things that are already happening in the community. So it's kind of our work to parse out what's an actual increase in biased behavior, whether it's criminal or non-criminal, and what is just sort of the good work that's being done to get at that sort of part that's below the water. And we think of it like a big iceberg, where we know that only about 1 in 15 hate crimes are reported.
For Rabbi Kahana, he says he's unsure what the coming years may bring in regards to hate crime trends, but is hopeful better days are ahead.
I believe in America. I believe in the American people. I really hope that our better natures will prevail.
Now, part of what PPB thinks could be motivating the increase in bias reports is their own outreach to the community. This outreach, they say, includes working with cultural advisory councils that pair PPB with community leaders, building trust among historically marginalized groups. Other outreach strategies include collaborating with neighboring counties and national agencies such as the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office.
Hey, Adrian, talking about the importance of reporting these crimes, in 2019, that legislation that you mentioned in your story there created the statewide bias crime hotline. So how does that hotline work for people that may not be aware of it?
So that hotline is run by the Oregon Department of Justice. And, you know, PPB and other law enforcement agencies encourage anyone to call 911 if they believe they're a victim of a bias crime or bias incident. But this statewide hotline is available as well. You see the number right there at the bottom of your screen. Statewide, anybody can call that number, and you can talk with someone, a staff member at the Oregon Department of Justice, and they could potentially refer your case to local law enforcement.